How we doing, everybody? It's Wardy here. It is December 19th, 2025, and our first of potentially multiple forms of content today. Obviously indicative as to if news happens later on this evening, whether it's breaking news or key reporting that we have to break down, as we always do every single day here throughout the offseason on WardyNYM. And in case you guys did not check it out already, we broke down extensively last night in a late night video how the Mets have pried away from the Yankees, the number 2 overall prospect in Major League Baseball for the upcoming class in 2026 in the IFA period, and that is Mr. Yandi Diaz. Check out that video, what you need to know, as well as our reactions in a live stream to Michael Cohen returning to the San Diego Padres instead of landing with a team like the New York Mets, who showed a level of interest. Today, folks, we're here to break down the following topics. Steve Cohen began his morning by calling out Mets fans on social media. We'll break down ultimately why exactly he did that. What did he have to say? And ultimately, what are the Mets looking like for the remainder of the offseason with their willingness to spend versus lack thereof? From there, we will get into the Tampa Bay Rays making some spicy moves today. They have made multiple trades, parting ways with key fixtures as part of their core, as the Rays are looking to move younger in 2026, which is far from shocking. But has this now opened the door for the Mets as a potential trade partner, as David Stearns has traded with the Rays more than any other team since becoming club president? We'll break that down, as well as what has happened with a team like the Pittsburgh Pirates, who initially looked like a really feasible option for Jeff McNeil to be traded to, no longer is the case. So what is the market looking like for Jeff McNeil and the potential of him being traded this offseason? We'll also talk about the Philadelphia Phillies, as they are making moves, but moves that do in fact insinuate that they are going to be shedding some payroll. Why are they doing this? And a whole lot more is what we're going to get into in this one. Hit that like and subscribe button on your way in, everybody, as it's a great way to support the platform. Let me know your initial thoughts, reactions, and analysis that we have to break down in this one. And as always, shout out to our amazing sponsor that has you covered all of your ticketing needs, that being at SeatGeek. Of course, use my promo code WARDY10, that is WARDY10, whether you need it for NHL tickets, NFL tickets, NBA tickets, concerts, comedies, you name it, anything in the ticketing space. SeatGeek, the #1 rated ticketing app in the game today for a reason, has you covered. Use my promo code, again, WARDY10, link down below in the description for 10% off your next purchase. Now, let's deviate away from these Yandi Diaz highlights, because I got a lot to say about Yandi Diaz, as I have a lot to say about the Rays and their trades that they're actively making in the process and where they could be a great fit for the Mets. But in the meantime, let's get on to why you likely clicked on this video, because you want to see my reaction, or maybe you want to share more of your input as to what happened with Steve Cohen and Mets fans today. So let's go ahead and do exactly that. This all stemmed from an article that dropped from my friends on the New York Post Sports today. Shout out to them. If you guys don't know, I'm a contributor for the New York Post. I did a segment with Brandon London just over a day ago, breaking down why ultimately the Mets brought in Cleavinger, another former Yankee reliever. But as you guys see here, the Mets said they wanted Pete Alonso back, and what they did was something else. This is true, but that isn't what we're here to talk about in the article. In the article, it goes on to headline the Mets' estimated payroll heading into next season. And the estimation of that payroll that they were suggesting was between $310 and $320 million. For context, the Mets payroll this past year was $322+ million as is. So this led a lot of fans to running to the belief that, oh my God, the Mets are actually going to run out a payroll that's lower than this past year, which means that they have no wiggle room to actually make moves. And this ruffled the feathers of Steve Cohen, who is fed up with these narratives that are being built either through the media or by the fan reaction in particular. And it had a lot more to do with the latter than I did with the Post, because Cohen gives exclusives to guys like Heyman and Sherman all the time. This has less to do with the Post and 10 times more to do with the fan reaction that came out of it. Now, I was not one of these fans this morning that had anything negative to say, because I really think that you're living in a cave if you genuinely believe the Mets are going to roll into next season with the payroll less, at minimum, at least similar to what they had this past season. It's not going to happen for logical reasoning. But Steve Cohen had to reiterate that for those who don't pay attention. So let's go ahead and do exactly that. As you guys can see here, he stated the following first. As typical, the usual idiots misinterpreting a Post article on Mets payroll for 2026. I can't imagine our payroll to be lower than last year. It's always hard to predict, but that would be my best guess. So Steve Cohen is rolling up the sleeves and he's not holding anything back. He understands that Mets fans are frustrated, but he also too is frustrated. And I think he's frustrated in large part because, one, the ownership group and the front office has not done enough yet this offseason and suggests why Mets fans should buy into next season, right? That obviously doesn't sit well with them. And Cohen knows that it isn't for a lack of effort on his or David Stearns' end to put out a great product for next season. But I understand, easier said than done when you lose guys like Alonso Diaz and you have fans rightfully pissed off about it. So Steve doesn't hold back, and the fact that he went out of his way to say the usual idiots misinterpreting a post article on Mets payroll. So he's fed up, and clearly he's been doom scrolling on X, I'm sure, more times than we could even count. Seen fan interaction on them sharing their disgruntlement on what the Mets are supposedly going to be doing heading into next season, even though that now appears to be a fallacy. He goes on to state the following after the fact. Payroll watchers always forget to budget for waiver claims, player movement from minors to majors, and trade deadline moves. That's how it typically works. And he's right. To give credit here to Cohen, what was not stated in this initial piece from the Post was the fact that they were now looking at that 310 to 320 million range, while not even taking into account the simple notion of arbitration settlements that have yet to be had for this organization. So again, we can go at estimations all we want, but there's still so much that needs to happen this offseason that quite literally making an estimation means nothing. It reaches a quick moot point. All it does is create this kind of potential narrative among the fans to have the kind of reaction that they're having. So you can blame whoever you want to blame here for this discourse happening, but what we do have to say is that what we know is that this payroll payout for the Mets in 2026 is far from established yet, okay? So not only do they have to figure out arbitration-eligible players, figure out settlements that have not, in fact, been reached or accounted for, you also have to bear in mind, as Cohen stated himself, trades and a lot of other things. It's as simple as this, Mets fans. We have known since the start of the offseason the Mets are likely to trade guys like Jeff McNeil and at least one of Kodai Senga or David Peterson. Now, while these guys are not making crazy money, if you trade McNeil and trade the majority of his salary, he's making north of $16 million for the upcoming year. Then he has a 2027 option, but it's a club option, so he's essentially a rental unless someone really wants to buy in for his age. I believe at that point he'll be 35 or going into 36 season for 2027. So for McNeil, that's a contract that even if you get rid of half of that, that is good money that you're saving. Separately, if you trade one of Senga or Peterson, that'll be more money that you're taking off of your payroll, at least north of 10 million plus, whatever the case may be. So with just those players alone, the Mets are expected to shed hopefully 20 plus million in payroll. So just add that to the mix as is, and you say to yourself, oh, so it really isn't as much out of the realm of possibility for the Mets that are currently at a baseline of 290 plus million this offseason to get themselves upwards of either, I'd say, in the 330 to an absolute most 350 range. I'm not going to get my hopes up on the Mets payroll being 350 next season, but if it happens, that means that yes, they landed one of Kyle Tucker, Cody Bellinger, and did a lot of other big splashes. Because, you know, when we emphasize trades in particular, let's also not forget the players that the Mets may trade for. You know, if the Mets say go ahead and swing a trade with one of the top aces available in the trade market, but is obviously costing a Cane's ransom right now, especially after the big trade that just happened between the Rays and the Astros that we're going to break down in a second, to see someone like Freddie Peralta in particular having only $8 million that he is owed for the upcoming season is further telling that the Mets, again, can get very creative on how they go about the dollars that they actually allocate for the team. So no, I don't think you look at this and say to yourself, oh yeah, the Mets are going to act like drunken sailors now. But what it does state and it does reiterate from the owner himself, the guy who pays the checks, the one who signs off on all this, on all the spending the Mets do, it is abundantly clear that the Mets are going to continue to spend, and they're going to continue to spend where they feel it actually makes sense. So we'll see, obviously, if that comes to fruition when it comes to how much the Mets are going to spend this offseason. But as I told you guys, if you've been following the platform, and I'll say it again, the Mets are going to go down this creative route and spending for certain areas of need while also trading for areas of need. And I think the trading may best the expenditures there, because when you look at what's available in the free agent market versus trade market, it leaves a bit to be desired. There's a steady drop-off in these respective starter, reliever, and obviously infield-outfield markets, with the exception of Tucker and Bellinger. And I know for certain the Mets are going to get creative about trading some of their top assets that they have available in their farm right now, because they have one of the best farms in baseball. It's only getting better after landing the consensus number 2 prospect in the IFA pool for this upcoming January that they just pried away from the Yankees as well. So everything's up and up for the Mets on that front. But to any fan, again, out there that genuinely believes that the Mets are going to roll in the next season with a payroll lower than this past year, 320 plus million, I have a bridge to sell you, and clearly so does Steve Cohen. So Mets fans, let me know your thoughts on that reaction. Honestly, the bluntness of Cohen, I think, is being taken in two different reactions. You have fans that are like, yes, absolutely counter the fans that have no clue what you're talking about. And then you have fans that are saying, listen, Steve, I understand the frustration by maybe a silly narrative being built, but you also haven't helped in that regard either, because if the Mets didn't have their lack of success this past year, we wouldn't be here nitpicking every little detail about the organization this offseason. So I see both sides of the coin, from the fan point of view that's frustrated, and also the fan point of view that still believes in their owner, understandably so, and an owner that's a dire Mets fan that just wants to do his best to put this team in the right direction. To be determined to see if he will actually do that with David Stearns this offseason. I've liked the moves that they have made thus far, but I have not liked the players that they've lost more than I've liked the moves that they made. Both things can be true when we have this discussion. So now to go on from Steve Cohen and his little reaction with the fans today, how fitting that of all things Steve Cohen could be saying to us, the fans, and to the media with everything that's went wrong this year. This is the kind of thing that reaches him to his boiling point this AM as he was reading those articles and reading the fan reactions. Curious to see if he will have further reactions like this offseason, or if he'll be happy to break down some key exciting signings and or trades the Mets make. To be determined on that front. But to go on now from Steve Cohen, let's get into the Tampa Bay Rays, because the Tampa Bay Rays have been doing a lot of moves, and the Tampa Bay Rays have always felt like a logical fit as a trade suitor for the New York Mets, and it starts with the obvious fact that the Mets have David Stearns. Give whatever remarks you want to give towards David Stearns, but what's true about him is that he has made moves specifically with the Rays more than any other organization since becoming club president. And we look at the laundry list of moves that he's made, both good and bad. The worst, you could rightfully argue this point, is Jose Siri for Eric Orsi. Orsi had a very solid year in the bullpen for the Rays, and Jose Siri was as much of a non-factor as a player could possibly be after being acquired via trade. So much so that the Mets cut him outright and let him hit the free agent market while he still had multiple years left of club control. Then you look at the moves that actually favor the Mets. And we go back to the 2024 first half of the season. The Mets traded for Phil Maton in a salary dump, and Maton went on a 22-inning stretch of absolute dominance in the summer when the Mets really needed those innings. Even sadly, Maton was batting practice come playoff time, but that's what happens when you overuse a soft-tossing right-hander and expect those meatballs middle to not get taken 400-plus feet out of there. So he's had his levels of success and lack thereof. Ironic that the most success the Mets have had over the years in trading with the Rays hasn't even been with David Stearns, but has actually been most notably with Billy Epler, trading for Brooks Raley and Kashawn Askew, going the other way. Askew, a very funky reliever that has yet to really blossom to the major league level consistently for the Rays, and Brooks Raley has been the biggest certainty of a southpaw reliever the Mets have had in their bullpen each of the past couple seasons when healthy. So to expand more on the Rays, as you guys can see here, there was a crazy 3-team trade that happened today, which include not only Mike Burrows going to the Astros, where they're adding themselves a pitcher that can eat innings for them. The Rays get 2 very exciting prospects, including Jacob Melton and Brito, 2 guys who were in the top 10 there for the for the Astros, if I'm not mistaken. And what you see for the Pirates and what they're getting, oh yeah, we're going to get Jake Mangum, Mets legend, contact Kane, remember him. Mason Montgomery, southpaw, will be able to eat innings for them. And Brandon Lowe, that's the key piece of the puzzle. You shout out my guy Jacob, our amazing editor on the platform, for shoving up this graphic quick. But that trade really took me back, because my first reaction, I know a lot of Mets fans felt the same, is, oh no, this means that Jeff McNeil has one less suitor. And that is true. McNeil has been connected to an array of teams this offseason, but one of them that's been fairly consistent has in fact been the Pittsburgh Pirates. Why? Because the Pirates have been in the market for a veteran bat that can really shore up their second base. Not maybe as much of a defensively minded guy, but someone who could really bring them some potential, and a veteran to really help balance their youth in their clubhouse. Well, McNeil's a downgrade in comparison to Lowe, who's one of the better hitting second basemen in all of baseball. Lowe now, as we see, who's not known for his defense at all, a guy who the Mets really liked at the trade deadline, didn't trade for him in the end because the Rays, reporting came out that the Rays were really stubborn and didn't want to trade guys like Lowe, guys like Baz, and Yandi Diaz, among others, because they want to see if they can continue to run it with their core potentially heading into 2026. Well, that ship has sailed, and they have changed their way of thinking, or it was just never accurate from what it was reported after the deadline. So McNeil, who had teams like the Pirates, and I would say are still in this mix, other teams like, to a certain degree, the Kansas City Royals, to a greater degree, more than likely, and probably a team like the Sacramento Athletics, or you, of course, have the Seattle Mariners, who very well could be of the appetite for McNeil now that they lost Jorge Polanco, because they're in the market for Brendan Donovan, but Brendan Donovan is going to cost you a lot of assets. Now, if the Mariners don't want to go the Brendan Donovan route, but maybe go with a B or C option, McNeil is that player. So McNeil still does have trade options out there, but losing the Pirates as a fit does hurt the Mets, in my opinion, on their chances to really get a deal they're looking for. So to be determined exactly what happens with Jeff this offseason, I'm still under the great belief that he will be traded. But knowing that you just saw in real time the Pirates trade and land a former All-Star second baseman is telling that they are not going down the McNeil route. For better or for worse, probably for better more than likely. But we'll see how the Pirates do and what other moves they make this offseason, as they've been trying to be diligent. And this is a respectable move in the sense of them actually bringing in a quality second baseman on the offensive end, a Jake Mangum, who of course will get more playing time than he probably needs for the Pirates, and then go on from there. But the moves did not stop there. Between the Rays and the Astros in particular, a domino effect happened, because shortly after we saw the Rays go ahead and trade Brandon Lowe, making it known that they're having more of a selling spree happen with some of their veterans. Oh, what do they go ahead and do? They make another big trade, and this is what they do, everybody. As you guys can see, Orioles are in serious discussions with the Rays to trade their right-hander and Shane Baz, and here are the official details that you guys can see from Jeff Passan. The Orioles are acquiring Shane Baz from the Tampa Bay Rays for outfielder Slider DeBron, catcher Caden Bodine, right-hander Michael Forret, outfielder Austin Overin, as well as a competitive balance round A pick, sources tell ESPN. This is a massive haul, and this is a massive trade. And this is further implications not only regarding the New York Mets, but also regarding the Mets in particular, as to try to be a great suitor for the Rays. Because here's why. Shane Baz was not a guy at all that needed to be traded by the Rays. He's someone who's still very much just getting started in his career. Honestly gives me similar vibes to someone like Edward Cabrera, who I think is still on the cusp of showing his true value, and I think he'll blossom now that he's going to be in a more increased role, potentially with an Orioles team that's looking to contend greater than the Rays next season. So staying in the AL East, having that level of comfortability, I think will bode well for Baz. Baz is under contract for a couple years left in his deal, as we know, and he's a guy that can eat you quality innings when he is healthy. In turn, not only did the Orioles give up top prospects, they gave up a top 3 prospect or so. They gave up 3 guys that are relatively in their top 10. Technically, I believe it was like 2-3 range, and then you had 10 and 11, and then number 30. So what do you need to know about these prospects? 3 of the guys that they traded were former first-round picks, 2 of which were from the first round this past year alone. So the Orioles are now officially locking in on their win now stage. They know they have the youth movement, obviously headlined by Gunnar Henderson to a much lesser degree now, Adley Rutschman to a higher degree, their catching prospect that they just gave a massive, I think, 7 or 8 year contract to not that long ago. And then you look, of course, at Jackson Holiday, and the list goes on from there. They have a lot of exciting pieces, and I like the O's. I'll be rooting for them this year, especially that Alonso's there. But this is clear as day how deep the pitching market is to trade for guys. But also bear in mind, Baz has multiple years of club control. The guys that the Mets are after in particular, whether it is a Sandy Alcantara, he has 2 years left, so you can make the argument there that he will be at an increased value. Tarek Skubal is going to cost you the farm, but he's a rental. It doesn't really matter if he was a rental or controllable. He's still going to cost you a lot of assets, bar none at minimum. Then you look at Freddie Peralta, a rental contract. He's going to cost you plenty, but he's a rental, so it wouldn't be as much as if he was, say, on a 2-3 year left of his contract. When you also look at Joe Ryan, he's someone who has a couple years left on his deal. Pablo Lopez, same thing, but that's a payroll I'm sure the Twins would love to shed. It really depends on the player's circumstance for the New York Mets and who they're trying to land here. But this gives us at least some idea and a grasp as to ultimately how expensive pitching will be in the trade market. And Nick Pivetta, who's essentially on a 1-year contract as he has opted out to each of the next couple years for the Padres, who the Mets have liked and been trade talks with, he might be more feasible than ever now, because clearly it's going to take a lot to land these guys. I'm not really sure if the Mets have the appetite to trade away a lot of these key assets for a pitcher. And Shane Baz is good, don't get me wrong, but you could make the argument that this was a slam dunk win of a trade for the Rays, who churn out great pitching year in, year out, and don't lose any sleep over it. So they're not going to lose sleep over making this deal, nor are they going to probably lose sleep over the deals that they may potentially make moving forward. And that's what leads us to the Mets discussion, because as we know, Stearns again has traded with the Rays more than any other team since becoming president of this organization, and the Rays have had players the Mets have liked over the years, and we're going to break down 2 in particular that I think make logical sense for this organization. And shout out to my guy Jake Brown, that many of you guys know from Mets Daily. I did a segment with him earlier today, you guys can check out, and we talked about a lot of these like-minded topics before the Shane Baz trade happened, however, but we were both in a universal understanding and agreement we would love Yandi Diaz. And here's the thing, everybody. Yandi Diaz is not someone that is going to be a massive defensive upgrade at first base. So before you say to me, he makes no sense for the Mets if they want to focus solely on defense. But here's the thing. The Mets don't just want to focus solely on defense, okay? The greater reality as to why the Mets parted with Pete Alonso wasn't just because of his defensive indifference. While that is true, what is most notable is that the Mets never want to lock down Alonso beyond a couple years because they just don't like his profile as a player. It's as simple as that. The Mets don't want to be locked down at all long-term at first base/DH. They want more wiggle room there, potentially for opportunities that could arise either later this offseason or a year or two from now, whereas they couldn't maybe do if they had Alonso on their payroll and on their squad. So you can agree or disagree with that all you want. I'm just telling you, clearly the Mets didn't want Alonso back for more ways than one. And Yandi Diaz, while he's not known for his defensive upside, he still is better than Alonso because of how low that bar was. Alonso was by many accounts among, if not the worst defensive first baseman in baseball statistically this past season. And that really is not an exaggeration. But Yandi Diaz, who's an absolute stud with the bat, decent at best with the glove, but it's someone who I think would be fine if the Mets have a really good rest of their infield. Make sure Mark Vientos gets no reps ever again at third base. Simeon and Lindor are going to scoop up the infield without a problem for you. So they're in good standing there, especially knowing how much of an upgrade defensively Simeon is at second base over McNeil and others. Simeon is literally one of the most elite defensive second basemen in all Major League Baseball. But Yandi Diaz brings a lot that I think is appealing to the Mets. And one of them is the fact that Yandi has a club option for 2027. So even though technically he's not officially, like a rental, he is someone, however, that very well could be utilized as a rental contract if the Mets don't want to opt in for next season. Because Yandi's entering his age 35 year, but he's been unbelievably consistent. 25 home runs, 83 RBIs. A 300 average, 366 on base, a 482 slug, 3 WAR season, 35% above league average as a batter. And for context, that is only 7% lower than Pete Alonso this past year. And that is the way that David Stearns will continue to think. It'll have far more to do in how they can get the best value out of players instead of it being that, Alonso gave us north of 40 home runs a year. We need to make sure that we replace him with solely a guy that provides that exact thing. As if that was the route they want to go down, they would have just brought Alonso back. That's clearly not how they're trying to spread the wealth of their dollars and allocate their assets via trade. But Yandi Diaz brings a lot of tangibles that I think are awesome for the Mets. 90th percentile in batting value, 84th in xWOBA, 94th in expected batting average, 73rd in expected slugging, 94th in average exit velocity, league average in barrel percentage, 94th in hard hit percentage, well below league average in sweet spot, but it doesn't matter, 72nd in bat speed, 84th in squared up percentage. We also see 76th in chase percentage, 85th in whip percentage, 88th in K percentage, above league average in walk percentage. Again, leaves a bit to be desired on the defensive end, as you guys can see, and not the best base runner, but neither was Juan Soto. Look what happened this past year, so I don't really care about that. Yandi Diaz makes so much sense for the organization. Here's why. There's no long-term commitment. You're not going to have to give up the entire farm for him at all. Yes, you'd have to give up assets and probably guys that'll go on to dominate for the Rays, but the Rays are so good with their player development, that's probably more of just them being great with their player development than it is necessarily the players that the Mets are giving up. But separate from that, Diaz would really fit the mold of a platoon with Polanco from first base to DH. So while, yes, the Mets don't have the most defensively sound guys at first base, Diaz is still an upgrade over Alonso. And if you have Polanco there, who's very versatile, who's played all over the infield, I don't think it'll be nearly as much of a liability as some fans are making it out to be, especially knowing how much of a well-roundedness of players that they would be landing in doing so. Well-rounded in the sense of Polanco being a clutch king, huge playoff performer this past year for the Mariners, and a guy who had an over 800 OPS, batting from both the left and the right side as a switch hitter. Yandi Diaz has crushed it for literal years. There's so much to love about Yandi, and I really do think as someone who's stayed unbelievably steady in his career, batting north of 300 every single season, even had a 330 average in 600 play appearances 2 seasons ago. A 932 OPS in 2023, dropped to 755 in 2024, now a very respectable 848 this past season. Of course, Diaz's numbers may not stay as steady as he goes from a batter's park half the year to more of a pitcher's park in Flushing, Queens with the Mets, but his value shouldn't be an absurd drop-off where everything just changes drastically. He looks like, truthfully, Yandi Diaz feels like the kind of guy that makes more sense than not for the Mets, so with my luck, it's not going to happen because of that reason. But definitely an attractive piece to try to pry from the Rays, knowing that they're kind of doing a fire sale of veterans that are not going to be locked down long-term, or guys they just don't see really having much of a future. Now, they're not going to do it with everyone. They're still going to look to compete next next year. So for all we know, maybe they will run it back with Yandi Diaz. But should they not, and should they have the appetite to trade him, Mets should absolutely be in that market if they haven't already. Another player I want to talk about from the Rays is a guy who I liked a lot leading up to the trade deadline. Didn't really talk about him since. I'll also just say one more thing about Yandi Diaz because I didn't get a chance to. I want to show you guys a little bit more as highlights for a second. So there's one final thing I just want to say on Yandi, then we'll get on to Garrett Cleavinger. What does Yandi Diaz also bring that I think is a very important element? From the reading that I've done and from all the homework that I've seen, he's another guy that's been beloved in the clubhouse. Another guy that has been a leader for the Tampa Bay Rays, especially with the amount of youth movement that they've had over the years. I mean, Yandi has been this steady veteran bat that has stayed afloat and stayed consistent while a lot of things have happened around the rest of the roster and the organization as a whole. The fact that they had to play in a minor league ballpark this past year, essentially, because they had to play in their spring ballpark because of everything that happened due to the hurricane over a year ago and in the Tampa area where they couldn't even go back to, the Trop. That's not an easy thing to have to deal with. We see guys like Luis Severino with the Sacramento A's having a 6+ ERA at home because he hates pitching in a minor league ballpark. Then you'll see guys like Yandi who, again, thrived in that ballpark because one, the dimensions don't hurt him, but two, he's just so steady. So from a leadership aspect, a great clubhouse character, a veteran who's been around in the game long, who's been in some really, really big stages in his career. He's been a part of some great runs for the Rays over the years in the playoffs. There's a lot to like about him, and I think that those are all things. A nice little play by Yandi, who actually knows how to give a nice underhand toss to first base without having the yips and throwing it over his head. Cough, cough, Alonso to Stanek, DC. No, you know. Yandi's a guy who I think makes a lot of sense for this organization. And if he is traded, I will be bummed out if he doesn't land with the Mets, unless the Mets say, you know what, we're going to sign Cody Bellinger comfortably. He's going to eat reps at first and the outfield, and we don't have anything to worry about there. I'd say bring on Yandi and Bellinger, but I'm getting greedy, and beggars can't be choosers. And right now, as a Mets fan, we are absolutely begging for guys to come to this organization that are actually good, that'll help us upgrade from a roster that doesn't look all that great at the moment. But to now go from Yandi, let's go on to the next year. And like I said, Garrett Cleavinger, because Garrett Cleavinger is a fascinating option for the New York Mets. He's someone that the Mets have shown a level of interest in the past, if I'm not mistaken. Nothing really materialized, however. Otherwise, he'd be in a Mets uniform right now. I think it's about time. We're like 3+ years removed from Brooks Raley being traded to the Mets. It's about time the Mets go ahead and pry away another really, really good-looking southpaw reliever from the Rays, okay? And there's a couple things I like about Cleavinger in particular, but what I like most about Cleavinger is that he's not the same profile as A.J. Minter and as Brooks Raley. He's a guy that I have far more confidence in how he handles this velocity and how he handles some of his off-speed stuff than A.J. Minter, who's been terribly injury-plagued each of the past 2 years. I think banking on Minter as a certainty next year will already be the Mets' downfall for their bullpen. They can't do that. I'm looking forward to seeing A.J. prove me wrong, but again, the guy's been healthy in 2 years, so shame on me for not looking at him as a lock of a guy who will dominate right away. Cleavinger has dominated in 67 games and 61 innings, a 2.35 ERA this past year, a 3.2 expected ERA, a sub-1 whip, 82 Ks, 12 K per nine, and 2.5 walks per nine. Gorgeous K to walk ratio. And it doesn't just stop there with Garrett Cleavinger. One, he has multiple years of club control, and he isn't making a lot of money. So I know the Rays don't really need to trade someone like him, but they would trade him if they find a suitor that's willing to give up some quality assets. And I'd imagine that to a degree the Mets would, because they're clearly in a better position to try to go down the trade route for certain guys to get quality talent on the bullpen front than they are in the free agent market and having to overspend for guys that they don't want to overspend for. I think they'd rather do something along these lines to actually give up the assets because they have an abundance of them in the farm than anything else. And going back to what I was saying again about velocity, everybody, this is very important, okay? A.J. Minter's not a guy that's going to be lighting up the lamp with his velo more than likely. Brooks Raley's a soft-tossing southpaw. Here's what separates Garrett Cleavinger from them. While Cleavinger is not a guy that's going to be sitting consistently north of 100 on the gun like Adrian Morejon on his rental contract, who I desperately want from the Padres, and I'm taking Morejon every day of the week over Cleavinger. Nothing personal against Cleavinger, but Morejon is the guy on a rental contract. But we've talked about him so much already, we're here to talk about the Tampa Bay Rays now. Garrett Cleavinger, 76th percentile in pitching run value, 88th in breaking run value, league average in fastball run value, 83rd in expected ERA, 87th that we see in expected batting average, 84th in fastball velocity, 62nd in average exit velocity, 82nd in chase percentage, 97th in whip percentage, 96th in K percentage, walk percentage 63rd, 85th in barrel percentage, 45th in hard hit, 74th in ground ball, slider, sinker, four-seam, sweeper, cutter. He's got the kitchen sink to throw at you as a very crafty southpaw. And again, he sits 97, topping out 99 plus on the gun. That is the kind of lefty the Mets need in their bullpen. That's what they traded for in Gregory Soto this past year at the deadline, and it failed after his first 7 to 10 innings. It was absolutely putrid from that point on. Cleavinger is a certainty. He has been dominant for each of the past couple years. This is the best season he's had yet in his career, but he's only getting better, and this is a guy that I absolutely think if you're going to have to give up some assets, you do it. But as I said before, and I'll say it again, if you're not going to land Garrett Cleavinger because maybe a trade cannot materialize with the Rays, again, make sure it happens with the team that you have been reportedly in trade talks with in the San Diego Padres and Adrian Morejon. Morejon is only turning 28 the upcoming season. He's a pending free agent, 73 innings, 75 games total, and we're looking at just over a 2-year rate and 2.6 expected ERA. Not as sexy of a K to walk ratio, but I don't care because Morejon consistently sits north of 100 on the gun. He's nasty. He carved us up this past year against the Padres. I would love him, and I know I'm not the only Mets fan that feels that way. But now, to go on from talking about these players in which they have their levels of upside that would clearly be an upgrade for the New York Mets, let's go on from talking about them to getting on just a little bit more regarding the Orioles. I want to stay on the Orioles topic for a second because while it's not a guarantee or a lock, one does have to wonder now, if the Orioles are going to give up this many assets for Shane Baz, how much more involved are they going to be in the free agent market for starters? Because I get it, Baz is not making money right now, so it's not like it really hurts their payroll much. But the Orioles, who just landed a quality starter, do they have less of an appetite to go all in on a Framber Valdez now? Because the universal belief has been that it's been the Giants, it's been the Mets, and it's been the Orioles as the likeliest suitors for Framber Valdez this offseason. And there is at all a sliver of hope that Valdez going to the Orioles is more unlikely now after that trade with Baz, because maybe the Orioles don't feel as much of an urgency to go out of their way to spend for a starter like Valdez. In comes the New York Mets. I'm not going to go on a long tangent with Valdez. I talked about him plenty in yesterday's content. But again, there is no starter out there in the free agent market that checks off more boxes than Valdez as a Cy Young caliber pitcher, an ace caliber starter, a World Series champion against the Phillies a couple years ago, and a guy that can consistently be dominant for you for each of the next couple years. You worry about the latter half of that contract if you have to sign him to, say, 4+ years when it is time to worry about it. But you worry about how much of an immediate impact he'll have for you each of the next couple of years. I think Valdez, only entering his age 32 season, again, is the most surefire guaranteed thing of a guy that can give you north of 200 innings every single year, be your opening day starter, if not Noel McLean, and be your opening starter come playoff time. He has so much to love about him. I know there's been controversy with him and his hiccup with his catcher this past year. That has since kind of been refuted in the sense that everyone loves him. There really shouldn't be much to worry about there. People think he's a clubhouse cancer. After doing more homework, it doesn't appear that that is at all the case that maybe people were initially suggesting. So as long as he's not, as long as Valdez is going to land on a contract, let's say, God willing, around 4 years, maybe with a 5th-year option at most, that feels like that's right in the wheelhouse of what the Mets can and should be doing here for starters. Otherwise, slim pickings as to what's available in the free agent market. You're probably better off giving up some quality assets and going after guys with bigger names and bigger value in the trade market. But I definitely want to hear from you guys if you are under the belief like me that maybe the Orioles are not going to land Valdez in the end because they made this kind of... I could be wrong. They could go ahead and make a stupid splash for Valdez because they're really going all in. I'll be very envious of that. I will tell you plenty how pissed off I'll be if the Orioles go ahead and move in an offseason direction the way I've wanted the Mets to. Trade for a starter with upside that has yet to peak in his career with multiple years of club control, the 8 innings of the harder rotation, sign a starter with ace caliber upside, and bring in Pete Alonso. Like, if that is the route the Orioles go down, I'll not only be envious, but I'll be pissed off that the Mets did not go down that route themselves. But now going on from Framber Valdez, one final topic that I would like to get into before we wrap this one up, everybody, is the Philadelphia Phillies, because the Phillies made some interesting moves today. In case you guys did not see, let me enlighten you here just briefly. And it's the following. The Philadelphia Phillies traded Matt Strahm today to the Kansas City Royals for Jonathan Bowlen, who's not making much money and had his first breakout year as a reliever this past year, basically 40+ innings of a 3.86 ERA. Strahm has consistently been one of the more dominant southpaw relievers in the National League each of the past 2.5, 3 years now. Why would the Phillies do this? Well, it's abundantly clear the Phillies did this because, A, they made a trade quickly after for Kyle Backus, who will now be their lefty option and pair with Tanner Banks in their bullpen. Why? Because Kyle has very good splits this past year against lefties in particular. But the main reason, more than anything, is because of what this article states. From Matt Gelb, as you guys can see here, for I believe the Athletic, if not, I think the Athletic, because they're paired with the New York Times. So anyways, the Phillies are taking a risk by trading a reliable lefty reliever, Matt Strahm. A growing friction between pitcher and team prompted a move. More here. And in the article, it goes on to state that this was, again, a salary dumping move by the Phillies. They want to shed that payroll of Strahm, who had disgruntlement between himself and the organization. They went a different direction. The Royals are the benefactor because they land a really high-quality southpaw on their bullpen for little to nothing what they gave up. So fantastic job. Royals are quietly having a very solid offseason right now. Obviously, the Phillies have never done such a thing with the Mets in the division for a rival, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. What I'm here to talk about is the Phillies are shedding payroll. So why are the Phillies shedding payroll? Because contrary to what Mets fans are trying to label Steve Cohen and Stearns as trying to cut back on payroll for next year, the Phillies actually are, because they're trying to make roster room to bring back JT Realmuto money-wise. And if they want to do anything else of significance this offseason, they're going to need to shed more payroll. That's why they desperately want Nick Castellanos the hell out of there. That's why they wouldn't mind trading someone like Alec Boehm at the right price, especially if it's a need-for-need deal. That's why they need to get Brandon Marsh out of there. You know, like, these are guys that they've been trying to trade for over a year now. They need to mix it up. It appears that they're now going to do that. But whether they mix it up to actually bringing guys on larger inflated contracts, or if they do it more so just for having more roster flexibility beyond the 2026 season, has yet to be determined. But this move, clear as day. One, need to part ways with a player that there was a disgruntlement with. And two, wanting to now bring in a player that isn't as good right now, but has the upside to be as good against lefties from the reliever they trade for from the Diamondbacks separately. That came right after they officially traded Strahm in that 1-for-1 to the Royals, mind you. And a guy that, again, is making pennies in comparison to what Strahm was going to be making this year, and now he'll be making with the Royals. So really interesting to see what happens next for the Phillies this offseason. I have a sneaky suspicion that they're going to make some big splashes, whether it's bringing Ranger Suarez back and, really trying to be competitive for one of Tucker or Bellinger after trading other assets, to be determined, but can never count the Phillies out. You know that they're a team that's going to make moves to put themselves in the right direction, but shedding payroll now is telling that they might not have as much money to spend as maybe what you initially thought. So we'll see what happens there. But Mets fans, having said that, thank you all so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Be on the lookout if we have more content dropping later today at all. Until then, however, have a fantastic rest of your night, day, evening, whenever you're watching this. This is your guy, Wardy, signing out. Let's go Mets, folks. Peace out.